Last year we talked about by Yisrotzu Habonim Bekirbo that Yaakov and Esav shared the same womb, and I looked at the psychodynamic aspect of having twins, and that Rachel herself felt that her child, she didn't know it was twins from the narrator's perspective.
It's beginning.
And Rachel thought that her child was kind of schizophrenic. Every time she passed the place of Avodah Zarah, he struggled to come out, and every time he passed the Beis HaMedrash, she tried to come out. I want to this year to talk about the tears of Esau. So let's dive into what I mean by that, by starting with the text. So I will share with you the primal text. The scene starts when they come for the birthright and the blessings following the birthright sale, and that Yaakov feels that Esau has sold him the birthright, but Rivka says that won't happen without some kind of ruse, and so she dresses him up, and it says Vayigash, and so Jacob, dressed as Esau, approaches the blind father Isaac, Vayishak lo, and he kissed him. Vayoreach et reach begodov, and he smelt the raiments of his garment, the smell of a hunter's garments. And we're told that there's nothing worse than the smell of goat poo and goat excrement on a hunter's vest. So he smells the reach begodov. He smells the smell of his begodov, vayivarechehu. And it seems from the verse that as a result of smelling the smell, because he was blind, he would recognize that that is Esau the hunter. So he blesses him. And then he says, Re'eh reach bani. And who's he addressing? The Mefarshim ask, he's talking to God? Is he talking to himself? Is he, behold, the smell of my son, Kareach Sodeh, Asher Beruchu Hashem, the smell of the reach of the Sodeh, the smell of the field, which God blessed him. Okay. And then he gives him the bracha. And now we come to the climax scene, the most poignant scene, where now he had finished blessing Jacob. There's this Shakespearean moment where Jacob is going off the stage, and in comes Esau with his hunting food, because the father had wanted, bring me some venison, bring me some hunting food. Vayas gamhu matamim. He too brought these delicacies. Vayovela Ovi, he brings it to his father. And now he comes to his father, Yokom Ovi, arise and eat from my tzido, from my hunting, so that you can bless me. Vayomer lo Yitzchak Oviv mi ata. This is a very poignant, climactic moment in the whole parsha of Toldos. Who are you? Vayomer ani bincha b'chorcha Esav. I am your son, your firstborn son, Esav. Vayecherad Yitzchak harada gedola ad ma'od. This this moment of climax, and Isaac has this panic, fear. He's seized by this violent epileptic fit. Vayomer mi efo hu atzayed sayed. And who's the other guy who brought me? Who is that other guy? I blessed him. And now comes my verse that I'd like to dive in with you today. Kishmoa Esav es divrei aviv. When Esav hears these words of the father that I have blessed him, Vayitzak tza'aka gdola umara ad ma'od. Wow. Look how many words are spent on his response. Vayitzak, he shrieked. Tza'aka gdola, a great shrieking. Yes. Umara, and bitter. Ad ma'od, exceedingly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words are given to his response. Vayomer la'aviv borcheni gam ani avi, please bless me. I mean, what is your response in reading that verse? Is it, oh, that wicked Esau? No, it is total sympathy. It's total sympathy. And so what happened between the pshat, in which we have this beautiful sympathetic response as a reader? He's been fooled. He's been ausgefooled. He's been completely bamboozled by his brother or by Rivka. And his response, he's Esau the hunter. He's very uncouth. He's very coarse. But I mean, he's really feeling this pain. Sa'aka gdola. And you could say, yeah, well, he sold his birthright. So what do you want from me? But the response that the narrator is evoking in us, the audience, the reader, is this compassion for the older son. Primogeniture, he gets the bracha. Okay, he was hungry 20 years ago and he sold it, blah, blah, blah. But now his father's on his deathbed, and one has this extraordinary feeling of empathy. Comes along the Medrash, of course. Comes along the Medrash. And we're given 2 Midrashim. The first one is Breshit Rabbah, that's the oldest one. And what does Breshit Rabbah say? Breshit Rabbah tells us that there is a problem. The Breshit Rabbah is very sensitive to this poignant moment and the cries of Esau. The Torah doesn't ignore his pain and his suffering, doesn't ignore it. So it says, and the Medrash is bothered by Vayitzak Tza'aka. Why the double mention? Vayitzak Tza'aka. And we have another place in Torah where there is a double mention of Vayitzak Tza'aka. Jacob Za'akat Achad Hizik Yaakov le'Esav. Jacob caused Esau to cry a single cry. Dichsiv Kishmo Esav es divrei aviv Vayizak Za'aka. He cried an exceedingly great and bitter cry. And the cry was a direct result of Jacob taking the blessing Isaac had intended for him. So there's another place in Torah, right at the end, in the book of Esther, where that same expression is mentioned. Vehechon nifralo. So the Medrash ties the two together and said, well, if he did that, where was the payback? Where was the payment for this offense exacted from Jacob? Although he's fulfilling his mother's command, he was still held responsible, according to the Medrash, for the suffering his act caused his brother. Oh, Bashushan Habira. We're in the book of Esther. Shenema vayizag za'aka gdola umara. The same words in our pasuk is brought in the book of Esther. Ad ma'od. It's identical, except one is tzaka, one is zaka, but we'll come back to that. And Mordechai learned all that had been done and cried a loud and bitter cry. So Mordechai is somehow paying back for the sin of Jacob in stealing the blessing. That's what the Medrash tells us. Very, very curt, does not go into why, but somehow we now have to unpack that the debt had to be paid. The debt had to be paid. The other Medrash comes from the end of Kiddushin. And here, interestingly, it says, this is also brought in Tanchuma. Look how important the mitzvah of Kibbut Av B'Eim is. Kamo chavivo lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know, the Netziv really goes to town, showing how Esau excelled in Kibbut Av B'Eim. Bevo'o me Edom chamutz begadim. We say that on Shabbos afternoon by Zmiros. Bevo'o me Edom. Look who's coming from Edom. Chamutz begadim. He's wearing his Shabbos finery. Why? Because the Medrash says that Esau had a Shabbos coat that he would put on, specially when he came to see his father. And even though it was considered by Medrash to be trickery and fooling him, and he would ask him shilas and kashas in the Gemara to make out that he was learning, nevertheless, the Netziv says he was great in Kibbut Av B'Eim based on this Medrash. Kamal chaviv lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, she'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekapeach scharo bein tzaddik v'rosho. Doesn't matter who you are, tzaddik or rosho, the Eibishter doesn't distinguish. He doesn't favoritize whether you're a tzaddik or rosho. If you're involved in Kibbut Av B'Eim, oh my gosh, minolon, me Esav harosho. Al shekibed Esaviv. Nosan lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kol hakavod hazeh. He gives him all this covered because he was mechabed his father. Midah keneged midah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, and now here's our punchline. When he heard of what Jacob had done to him, shalosh demaos hizil Esav harosho. He let loose 3 tears. Echad me'eno shel yamin, one from his right eye, and when that dried up, the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The Eitz Yosef tells us. Echad me'eno shel smol, the second Beis Hamikdash destroyed when the tear of his left eye was dried up. Vashlishi nikshara be'eno v'lo yorto. And the third tear, which apparently was between the eyes, has yet to dry up, and therefore we have not received the first Beis Hamikdash because it hasn't yet dried up. We haven't yet paid the debt of Jacob. We're the children of Jacob. We haven't paid that debt yet. We are still in exile, waiting for that third drop from the third eye to dry up. And when did this happen? Because when he heard that Jacob had tricked him, he lifted up his voice and he cried. And he cried. So that's the second source about his crying, that the tears of Esau, 3 tears, first temple, second temple, and the third temple. The Tanchuma has a different, slightly different rendering. And the third tear he kept back, and that tear has salted the bread of our exile with tears and made us taste tears in threefold measure. It even strengthens the power of that third tear. So 3 Agadic sources tell us that a great punishment descends upon all of us, all because our matriarch Rivka and her son brought tears to the eyes of Esau, who was an entirely evil man. An entirely evil man. But I have told you before that that entirely evil man didn't become entirely evil until later in the Midrashic tradition. Because if we look at early Midrashim, at who is considered a Rasha, who is considered an evil man, here's the list. Here's the list. Pharaoh is called Rasha, Balaam is called Rasha, Nebuchadnezzar, Haman, Titus, Tinius Rufus. But it doesn't say Esau until much later, until after the Constantinus's conversion from being a Roman to a Christian, and then persecution started after 333 in Israel, in Palestine, and then we start seeing the persecution of Edom and the connection. Gerson Cohen has done all the research in this, Hebrew Union College, tracing how Esau becomes Esau HaRasha much later in Midrashic literature. And here is one example of that Esau HaRasha. And here it says, Omar Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi Hoyodorish Hakol Kol Yaakov Mitzavachas Mimasha Osu Hayodayim Shidei Esau. The voice is the voice of Jacob, Isaac says, but the cry is, but the voice is the voice of Jacob. And why is it the voice of Jacob? Because it is crying due to the hands of Esau. Here you have an example of a midrash that is now picking up on that. Now, the Medrash notes the parallel between this verse and the one in Megillas Esther when Mordechai finds out about Haman's decree. So Jacob causes Esau to let out a single cry. And where was he punished? That is the Medrash's core point. Punishment, it needs to be paid. You caused him anguish, you have to suffer anguish, and that's in the capital city of Shushan. So we can ask many questions on this Medrash, but just one, the critical one. Why is Jacob held accountable specifically for Esau's anguish? If Jacob acted wrongly by consenting to Rivka's scheme and disguising himself as Esau, why was he or his descendants, us, punished? Isaac also shudders upon recognizing his mistake, and we don't find Chazal criticizing Jacob for causing Isaac this kind of emotional trauma. Good question. Why isn't he punished for causing his father the Charada Gedola ad Ma'od? Why was he only held responsible for Esau's pain? And the Netziv has a stunning commentary. The Netziv says that Yaakov and Rivka were justified. No problem, halachically justified, because the blessings rightfully belonged to Jacob. He sold it, he paid for it, they belong to him. However, the Netziv says Jacob experienced a degree of gratification upon seeing his hostile brother's anguish. Oh my giddy aunt. He got a geschmack seeing his brother screaming. That's what we're being punished for. Now the Netziv is living in the 19th century and the Tsar is hacking them and he wants to take out all sorts of decrees upon the Jews of the Pale in terms of their eventual Christianization and the change of the whole curriculum, and the mother of all yeshivas that he has, his baby that he had created in Volozhin, was now up for grabs, and they eventually would close the doors of Volozhin because of these evil decrees. And so he's talking out of personal crying. He's crying when he's saying that. The Netziv says the blessings belong to us. That's not the point. The point is he got a geschmack when he sees his brother's anguish. That's the geschmack that we're paying the price for. He certainly didn't enjoy watching his father shudder, but he did feel a sense of vindication upon seeing his Esau cry. Esau, the big brother, the bully, and he got geschmack. The way when we watch movies and we always see it's the same plot. The underdog gets to overcome the overdog at the end, and we all get this geschmack out of it. For this, he was deserving of punishment. Now let's just dive a little bit deeper than that. Esau's tears and our tears. Vayiso Esau kolo vayev. Let's look at the Zohar. And the Zohar in Parsha Shmos, when Am Yisrael is crying because of Golus in Mitzrayim, the Zohar says something very enigmatic. The Zohar says, V'omer Rabbi Yitzchak, if you can follow with me in the Aramaic, the suffering of Am Yisrael, it happens because of the tears. Kad yishtalmun v'yichlun bechi demoas de bocha Esav kame ovi. And we are paying for the cries of the tears of Esav before his father. Tichsiv v'yisol Esav kolo vayev. Omar Rabbi Yossi, this is the Mantuba manuscript, that's why it's in parentheses. So Rabbi Yossi says, these are the tears that we shed in Galut. And it is only when these tears have been dried up that we will be ending the Galut. We will be freed from the Galut. And he brings a pasuk in Jeremiah 31, Bebechi Yavo v'tachanunim ovlin. They came to exile with tears, and with tachanun, they will be freed. This enigmatic Zohar stretches the Medrash, and he carries on to say that this is what the crying baby Moses is being seen by Miriam in the bulrushes and representing the suffering of Am Yisrael. Now, Rav Shmelka of Nicholsburg comments on this statement, on this drush, that the tears shed by Esav as a result of his intense pain over not receiving his father's blessings enabled his descendants to send Yaakov's offsprings into Galut. And that when those tears shed by the Jewish people wash away Esav's tears, then they will be redeemed from exile. So Reb Shmelka of Nicholsburg questions this statement and says, throughout the generation, suffering and afflicted Jews have cried millions of tears. You're telling me that we haven't yet washed away Esav's tears? Why haven't they been sufficient to eliminate the few tears shed by Esav so many thousands years ago? So he brings an interesting Gemara in Chulin, and he says, Min bemino eno bottle, meaning it is only possible to nullify an item by combining it with a more numerous item of a different type. But an object cannot be nullified by adding to it more of the same. So I have a bit of milk in the chicken soup. If it's bottled b'shishim, it's fine, but I can't make it bottled by adding more. So he says the tears cried by the Jewish people cannot cancel out Esav's tears. Why? Don't we cry for the same reason as Esav? How is it possible to say that the tears shed by Esav and those shed by the Jewish people are considered the same type of tears? Mino b'mino. So Reb Shmelka explains that Esav cries over the loss of the blessings that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov. And the blessings he gave to him were materialistic. I want the land. I want the blessings. Yitin lecha Hashem mikal hashamayim. I'm giving you all these blessings. From the fact that our copious tears throughout the generations have been unable to wipe these tears away, it must be that our tears are min b'mino, meaning, what do we cry for? Bone chayim zoine, we want gashmias, we want physical pleasures of this world, we want to have an easy life. These are all materialistic and mundane and earthly issues. And therefore they are the same issues and the same tears as Esau. And one cannot be bottled with the other. They can't wash them away because they have the same min. And so Reb Shmelka said, if we would only begin to cry, not over our unfulfilled physical needs, but our spiritual yearnings, then our tears would not be the same types of tears and that Esav shed, and we would be able to nullify them. It's a very dark interpretation, but I thought I have to bring it to your interpretation. I want to end up with an interesting Kotzgevort on this issue, because we've also been told that we shed false tears. And when did we do that? When Moshe is telling us that you didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael, and you came back, and every man was crying in front of his tent. So Moses says in Deuteronomy, and the Amorites came out, those who live in those hills toward you, and they chased you as the bees do, and they crushed you in Seir till Choma, from Seir till Choma, and you returned and you wept before Hashem, but Hashem did not accept your prayer. You wept. And so Moshe is saying, Bnei Yisrael, why are you crying? Why are you storming the mountains? You so much wanted not to go to Eretz Yisrael. You cried not to go into the land. You got what you davened for, and still you cry? Esav, explain your tears. You sold the birthright to him. So what are you crying for? So Esav says, I'm about to die. What good is this birthright to me? It's from the land. He swore to him and sold his birthright. Yaakov then gave Esav bread and pottage of lentils. And Esav ate and drank and got up and scorned the birthright. So the Gemara explains the following. It says, okay, there are false tears and there are real tears. There are zwei dinnen in tears. They're Sharei Dima'ot, the gates of tears, and they're never locked, we're told the Gemara in Brachos. And the Zohar tells us something very interesting. Surely all the gates have been locked and closed, yet the gates of tears have not been closed or locked. That means that even after all the gates are closed in terms of doing right and wrong, and you're punished and they're ready to be sentenced, but the gates of tears have not been locked. And tears come only out of suffering and sadness. All those angels, I assume it means, appointed over those gates, smash the beams and locks, and those tears enter the prayer, and the prayer enters before the holy king. Then that place is distressed by the sadness and distress of that person, as he is said, and Isaiah, in all their distress, he was distressed. Happy is the share of the person who sheds tears before the Holy One. Now the Kotzker says, okay, so why do there have to be gates in the first place? It's a real Kotzker tiefe Wort. What do I need gates for if I know my tears are going to go straight up? There are so many reasons to cry. Ask a baby, ask a kala, ask a mother of a ben bris, a mourner. Jews don't have a monopoly on tears, but neither tears nor passion are a litmus test for truth. And the Kotzker is all about truth. The mother of Sisera also cried for her son. Peta cries for the donkey blown up in a failed terrorist attack. Islamic jihad mothers also cry. So the Kotzker Rebbe says we need the gates to block out the false tears. There are tears and there are tears. And Chazal tell us regarding Tisha B'Av, Atem bechisem bechia shel chinom. You were by the Meraglim were crying false tears. You had no reason to cry then. Ani ekva lachem bechia ledora. So I am through Tisha B'Av. I'm going to give you a reason to. I'm now going to give you a reason to cry through the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. You wept in vain. I will establish it for you as a time of weeping for all generations. So I wanted to end up with this idea that sometimes words fail us, and I'm left still with a compassion for Esav's tears. And sometimes words fail us. When they do, depending on the cause and our own propensity, sometimes we resort to song, heightened prose, dance, other forms of wordless expression. And sometimes we scream. Primal screams that communicate an agony beyond verbal expression resound throughout the Torah. Vayitzak tza'aka gedola ad ma'od. And Kalmanovsky, I love what she says here. The first scream belongs to Abel, whose blood cries out. Another belongs to Hagar. She watches her son wither to death. Am Yisrael, as we see, screams in pain in servitude in Egypt and later during their trials in the wilderness. To receive the blessing only to learn that just moments before, Jacob had stolen Esav's identity and his blessing. The scream communicates his frustration at a world that does not conform to communal norms or to his personal expectations. His father's blessing belonged to him as the eldest son. Firstborns had a unique status in ancient Israel, received double the inheritance. For Esav, Isaac's blessing, Jacob defied all his assumptions of the way the world should work and how life should unfold. And so my compassion remains at the end of our little chat for Esav, whose brother and mother betray him. In our last year of political turmoil, natural disasters, rising anti-Semitism, and COVID-19, Esau's screams resonate with me even more. Like Esav, I feel as if I live in a world that does no longer conform to my expectations. My basic assumptions of how I live and work, how my children should be educated, how my family and friends gather, how we live Jewishly and we are challenged halachically. Nothing feels certain. What seem to be fundamental truths about the way the world should work have been turned upside down. And I think that the Torah reflects this particular understanding. It tells us, certainly in Bereshis, the story of individuals that defy norms and expectations to become us, a people that defy norms and expectations. And like our own, the Torah's topsy-turvy world is difficult to inhabit. But I think that the religious spiritual insight of this roadmap reflects the world I should prefer to live in personally and religiously. I don't want to live in a predetermined world. Nothing would change. A determined world which norms are fixed and expectations met doesn't allow for change, for development, for evolution, for growth and surprise. It does not allow for miracles that interrupt and defy the natural world. It doesn't allow room for the divine. So I bless you all to share with me the compassion of the tears of Esav that we are still trying to dry out and bring this galut to an end. And have a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon.